you have a mute button down in the left-hand corner of your screen, and if you would mute yourselves for the time being, that way we don't pick up any background noise. Some of us are proficient in this way far more than we want to be. There's also some opportunities for you to chat in the icons down below. If you want to make a comment, you're welcome to do so. We'll offer an opportunity for discussion as far as feedback and opportunities to dialogue with Bo as we move on. Also want to remind you that we are recording this tonight, just as a disclaimer to let you know, because there are some folks that could not be here to join us in person, and so we'll make that available to them a little bit later. Welcome to the first Wednesday Colloquy, as we're attempting to do this as we move through the summer, and I'm just delighted that Bo has agreed to be our guest for tonight. Bo does not need much of an introduction from many of you. He hails from Milledgeville, Georgia. It's also home to Central State Hospital, the largest asylum in Georgia, and that may explain some things about Bo. He has 2 degrees from Southern Seminary, which makes him near and dear to me, a degree in theology and adult education. He also has a doctorate from North Carolina State University, which really endears him to me. Bo is a preacher, teacher, coach, mentor, consultant, and most important of all, he is a friend. He is no stranger to us because he has been with us on leadership weekends at Granite Court. He has guided us through the dawnings process. He is married to an exceptional woman by the name of Gail. They have 2 adult daughters and 2 sets of twin grandchildren. And so I don't know what else I can say other than, Bo, I'm delighted that you've joined us tonight, and we just wait to hear what you have to offer us.
Thank you, Kevin. It's good to be here and good to see you folks again. I really want to thank you for the good work you do with dawnings. I'm not going to say that you've done, because I don't think you're finished with dawnings yet. And you've just been a flagship church for us with that endeavor through the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. So thank you so much for that. Am I waiting on you, Kevin?
Don't wait on me, bro.
Okay, I didn't know if you were gonna. I didn't know if we were going to Q&A this, or if you wanted me just to launch in.
The way I've set this up, Bo, is that we're going to allow you 30 minutes, whatever time you want to, and then we'll dialogue, push back, ask questions, however you want to lead us. And let me just say, before I be quiet, Bo and I talked about this a week or so ago, and we're just looking at current topics, things that are pertinent to church today. And so Bo decided, said that he would lead off talking about where we are, what is church, where is church, how is church, and what does it look like moving forward. So you're on, bro.
Thank you, sir. I think when we ask the question, what is church going to be in the days ahead, I think the first question we have to ask is, what is church? And if by church you mean the church building, then I think church is going to look very different for an extended period. When we are able to gather again, we will be in masks. We will be on every other pew, and some of us will be on the left side of the pew, and some of us will be on the right side of the pew, and we will stagger. There will be no greeting one another with a holy kiss or a holy hug. Those days are over. Handshakes are over for the time being, until this pandemic moves in a different direction. We will have to get used to the church gathered and the church scattered. Or as I tell my people, I'm interim pastor in Lumberton, North Carolina. As I tell them, they keep asking, when's the church going to open again? I say the church has been open all along, but maybe for the first time in y'all's history, you've been deployed. So I think there's going to be a lot more deployment. Youth will not be the only ones going on mission trips. And mission trip might be going to the grocery store or going to the bank in these days. So first and foremost, we have to look at what church is and what we mean by church. And if we mean the gathered and scattered or deployed community of faith, church is going to continue to do what it's always done. We are going to continue to be salt and light in our community. We're going to find ways to minister together and apart. And we're going to continue to take the name of Jesus with us to wherever that might be that we go. We will be on mission and continue to be on mission. The days of coming and sitting in the pew comfortably, those days are still going to be on hold for a while. Congregational singing, choir singing, those days are going to continue to be on hold for a while. I have seen the face masks. Have you seen the helmet with the clear mask around it? I have heard that choirs might don those helmet masks for a while to come and do choral music together. But singing is one of the most dangerous things we can do together, because when we're projecting whatever it is, those virus molecules are going everywhere. And so singing is going to be something we're going to have to reevaluate. So sitting in the pew, listening to the preacher preach, and passing the elements of communion, passing the offering plate, holding a hymnal, all those tactile things that we have done and those interactive things that we have done, those are going to be over for a while, if they ever come back. So churches who have, for the lack of a better term, abandoned the hymn books for projected visuals, they're going to be a step ahead because they already have screens and projection units and are used to doing that kind of worship. Not only do I think we have to ask, what is church? I think we have to ask, why church in these days? Why are we going to be the church? Because if we can ask what we mean by church and then ask why we do church, then we can begin to wrestle with how we do church. Simon Sinek, who is a sociologist and prolific writer in our culture today, says that people don't buy what we do, they buy why we do it. People don't buy what we do, they buy why we do it. So people don't buy a Lexus car because it drives really good or because it has a long life if you maintain it. Why do people buy a Lexus? Because people think you're somebody if you're in a Lexus. Last week, I was out, headed to the grocery store, and this beautiful red Lexus convertible pulled up to me, beside me at the red light. And there was a 16-year-old little snot-nosed kid beside me driving that car. And on the car, it said, "Happy Graduation." And it took every Christian fiber in my body not to get out of my car and throttle that kid. When I graduated from high school, I got a 1957 blue Ford pickup truck. with rust spots. And I complained to my father about the rust, and he said, "Oh, I was going to get that painted for you." And at least I thought that was something. And a couple of days later, my dad brought home a gallon of silver DeRusto paint and painted over the rust spots. It was a real babe magnet, I can tell you. So people don't buy what we do, they buy why we do it. So we have to think about, why are we doing what we do? And then we have to share that with our community, both across the street, down the road, and around the world. In 1954, why we did church was so that we could win the lost and keep people from hell. Most of the people under 35 have no idea what you mean if you say that language to them. But if someone 35 and younger, I would even say 45 and younger, says, "Why do y'all do church? Why do you keep doing church?" We can go to Habakkuk 2:8. Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of us? But that we live humbly and do mercy and live justice. Under 45-year-olds understand justice. They understand that they have been brought up in an unjust world. They understand that people of color have been treated unfairly. They understand that people with differing sexual orientations have been treated unfairly. And for the most part, the church has been one of those weapons of choice to hurt people of color and to hurt people of different sexual preferences, to hurt people of differing economic levels. And if we can say to them with integrity, we want to bring God's justice into our world. We want to be vessels of redemption and transformation. They understand that language. But we want to win the lost to keep you from going to hell. They don't understand that language. And so we have to figure out how we're going to have conversation and meaningful communication with one another. So not only what is the church, but why the church? Why do we do what we do? And then we can begin to figure out how we're going to do what we do. For many of us, we are being called to lead in unfamiliar days and unfamiliar ways, and trying to figure out what in the world that means for us. So I would ask you to think of a situation you found yourself in where everything was unfamiliar. If you ever found yourself in a situation where everything was unfamiliar, if you want to unmute yourself and speak back to me, that would be great.
Walking around the block in Shanghai.
All right.
I was about to say this.
In Shanghai, absolutely. Somebody else?
I spent 3 weeks in Vietnam in college. It's pretty similar to the Shanghai story, trying to buy tape at a store.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Somebody else?
Going to college.
Going to college? Yeah, that'll do it. Anybody else? Well, what if I had told you on December the 31st that about March 15th, you would all find yourself in a situation where everything was unfamiliar? What if I had told you you would be going to church over your telephone or your television or your computer screen? What if I told you that the world economy would shut down for 6 to 8 weeks totally or almost totally? You would have laughed at me and told you I was crazy. But this ball of color that you see on this slide, that's a cross section of a coronavirus cell. That little thing right there has totally changed our whole world. And we suddenly have found ourselves in a situation where everything is unfamiliar. Nancy Thiessen from Duke University says that challenges today are less foreseeable and knowledge is less reliable. So when coronavirus broke out, some people saw it going across China. Some people saw it making its way into Europe. But for the most part, we didn't respond to it over here. Maybe a couple of bulletins from the Centers for Disease Control, but for the most part, we didn't see that coming. And when it did get here, the best people could tell us was wash your hands and don't touch your face. Well, there's a whole lot more to coronavirus than washing your hands and not touching your face. And we finally began to see that. And some would say we saw it too late. Some would say we saw it too slowly. I can tell you there are people in Eastern Carolina where I serve who would say it didn't happen at all. It's a giant hoax on the world. And those of you who have closed your churches are sinning against God. I don't have time to respond to that nonsense tonight, but I can tell you knowledge is a lot less reliable. And part of it is because this is what 21st century pedagogy looks like today. And this slide is about 3 years old, so it's even more complicated now than it used to be. And we have information at our fingertips immediately. I've talked to some of my senior adults about Pearl Harbor days. Pearl Harbor, World War II. Many of us weren't born then, but those who were tell me that it was almost 24 to 48 hours before the United States was aware of the attack on Pearl Harbor. They also tell me that it was about 2 weeks before they saw any moving pictures of Pearl Harbor. And they had to go to the movie theater to see that. Well, my 5-year-old grandkids know how to get around the password on my phone and have access to almost anything they want instantly. It's amazing. It's amazing the world we live in. And we can, sorry? Someone? We can either fuss about it or we can adapt to it. And that adaptation is what Greg Jones calls traditioned innovation. Traditioned innovation is doing new things to excite younger folks and not scaring older folks to death. So that with one hand, we grab hold of tradition, and with the other hand, we reach out towards innovation, with innovation. And that's what is before us today in the church. So what does that look like? I have a great answer for you. I don't know. But I do know this. we have to lead as we can, not as we can't. We have to be very clear about why we're doing what we're doing, and then we find ways of traditioned innovation that help us lead as we can, not as we can't. So that's the challenge before us. And we have to continue to find ways to do those traditions that are near and dear to us in innovative ways. Now think about your church and think about the programs of your church. A year ago, if I had told you your WMU would not meet, many of you would have thrown your hands up and said, well, the church will die if the WMU does not meet. Many churches I know, the WMU has not met in 3 months or better. And yet the ministry of the church goes on. If I had told you 6 months ago that we would be doing Wednesday night prayer meeting on computer screen with 50 different little blocks looking like the Brady Bunch, you'd have said, well, I'll never attend that. I'm not interested in participating in that. And yet here we are. If I'd ever told you that you would be giving your offering online, you would have said, no, I won't. If I'd ever told you you'd be going to church in your pajamas, you'd have said, I wish I could, but no, I won't. And yet here we are. So my brothers and my sisters, the challenge is real, and some of those traditions that we have held onto for so long, some of those sacred burgers or sacred cows that we have worshiped for so long need to be turned into hamburger. And we need to find those traditions that are near and dear to us, but find innovative ways to now do those things. I teach a Sunday school class on Monday night that looks a lot like we look right now. And the first 5 minutes is everybody getting on the screen and going, well, hey there, Nancy. Hey there, Kevin. I ain't seen y'all since the food line this afternoon. And for 5 or 6 minutes, that's what they do, just like a Sunday school class. Just like a Sunday school class. But we have great conversation. We have great interaction. And it's live on Facebook. If you're not having enough Bible study, come join us on Monday nights at 7 o'clock on my Facebook page. I'd love to have you. And you can hear them in the background talking smack to each other or greeting one another with holy kisses. I'm not sure what it is. So the challenge is real. The question is, what's gonna survive this pandemic? What programming is gonna survive this programming? And I can tell you all bets are off. I think that worship is going to continue. I think that Bible study in some way is going to continue. I think that we all yearn for fellowship, but it's going to look very different in the days to come. In Lumberton last week, our pastor search committee met. They met in a huge 8-foot distance circle in David and Terry's backyard, and 3 of us were on Zoom, and they would turn the camera around and we had great discussion, but it was not your traditional pastor search committee. We're going to continue to have missions, but like I said earlier, a mission trip may be going to the grocery store or the drugstore, or taking literature to older adults. my wife and I have been sheltered at home since the middle of March. We've gone out twice. That's it. And I have continued to be the interim pastor at First Baptist Lumberton, North Carolina. I did not see that coming when I said yes to them. And if that weren't hard enough, then throw in racial violence and economic disparity and some of the other issues that we have yet to deal with. And the world has never needed the church like it needs us right now. The world has never needed us like the world needs us right now. So I would challenge you to live humbly and do justice and mercy in the world.
Uncle Bo, we've been having church on Sunday mornings via Facebook, and is that really going to church? Have we really worshiped?
Well, I'll tell you my criteria for a worship event is if somebody laughs and somebody cries. So on Sunday morning when we're there together and I'm preaching, if somebody can smile at me and somebody can wipe a tear, I think I've done my job. And from the feedback that I'm getting from our congregation and some of the conversations I've had just individually, we're having worship at First Baptist Lumberton. 2 Wednesday nights ago, we had a conversation around racism in a Sunday school class that I was visiting. And 2 people in that class had been victims of racism in the last 2 weeks. And as they told their story, I wept like a baby. I was just hurt by that for them. We had church that night. I teach a class for McAfee School of Theology on Monday evenings, and half of that class are people of color. And the week following George Floyd, we did not have class as usual. They thought we were going to have class as usual. We had prayer meeting, and we wept, and we laughed, and we prayed. I think they would fight you if you said they hadn't been to church that night. So yes, and as I say to churches, worship is not dependent upon who is leading worship. Worship is dependent upon the attitude those of us who are participating bring to worship. So if I get up in my pajamas and go sit in my special chair with my special mug of coffee and expect for you to entertain me for 20 minutes, probably hadn't had church. But if I come expectantly to hear a word from the Lord or to see a word from the Lord, we're probably going to have church. Sorry, I didn't mean to preach that answer, but.
Preach, brother. Any other questions, comments, something that Bo said that sparked a thought that you want to mention, to bring up, to ask?
Bo, question for you. You mentioned, asked the question, when we had been in a situation where everything was unfamiliar. And, obviously that's where we are now. That seems to be bringing on a lot of angst, a lot of mental agility, if you will. We can't just go on autopilot anymore. How do we address that as a church in terms of uplifting people?
We have a circle of 5 to 10 folks that we love and care for in the church. And every week we call those 5 to 10 people and we ask them this question. Chris, how is it with your soul? Chris, how is it with your soul?
It's good.
Chris, how is it really with your soul?
It's harder than it used to be, Bo.
See, when I call you and ask you that question, that takes the conversation to a whole different level. If I say, Chris, how you doing? You're going to go, I'm fine. And then you're going to ask me and I'm going to go, I'm fine. But yet I'm crying like a baby at a Sunday school, online Sunday school class. It ain't fine. And you're right. It's harder than it used to be. So who are 5 people in your circle of influence within the church that you can call every week, either on the phone or have a Zoom call? I love Zoom, by the way. I love it. And so I call them up and or Zoom with them and I say, Melissa, how is it with your soul? I saw your post on Facebook and it looks like you're struggling a little bit. How is it with your soul? But because not only do we have instant access to the world, but we have instant access to most one another as well. So my mother-in-law carries a cell phone. She never turns it on, but she has one. And we asked her a couple of weeks ago, Mom, why don't you turn that cell phone on? She says, I do turn it on when I need to make a call. That kind of defeats the purpose. She still has a landline. And we talk to her. We talk about what's going on in the world. I got to tell you, my mother-in-law is at a different place than where my wife and I are on most everything in the world, politically, socially, economically. But we have conversation about that. And the only way that we will continue to be church with one another is by having difficult conversations with one another. And it's okay. My best friend in Charlotte and I differ on most things politics. And when one of us brings that conversation up, the other of us says, before we go into this conversation, I'm going to say to you, I'm going to love you at the end of this conversation. Regardless of where we land, I'm going to love you at the end of this conversation. And we listen to one another and we learn from one another. I think that's church. Theologically, we have lots of differing opinions theologically, politically, socially. But if we are living humbly and we are doing justice and mercy, our relationship is bigger than the issue, whatever the issue. And then the other thing is, so Chris, how can I pray for you? And I wait for you to give me an answer.
Yeah, you can pray for me for mental health, if nothing else, for dealing with all the bad things that I keep hearing.
Okay. So 2 questions that you call that circle of 5 that you're engaged with. How is it with your soul? And how can I pray for you? And I can tell you, I have been prayed for on the phone, and I have been prayed for over Zoom, and it's just as meaningful just as passionate and I think just as effective as when I'm in the hospital room or when I'm sitting in your den or when we're in a Sunday school class. When we are ministering to one another, it's the relationship that matters. And that's really what makes us church anyway, don't you think? You can nod like this or you can nod like that, it'll be all right.
Anybody else have a question or a thought, pushback? Unmute yourself, Judy.
As a senior citizen, I'm kind of sort of into social media, but lots of people my age are not. And so that bothers me. I think the younger folk, love the Zoom and they love the social media and whatever. But what happens to the older senior citizens that don't feel comfortable with that?
Part of the people in your circle of five may be people who aren't technologically savvy. So put a magazine in a Food Line bag and drive across town to your friend's house and call them on the phone and say, I'm in your driveway and I brought you a gift and it's on your front porch. And then you stand at your car in the driveway and they stand on their front porch and you say, Thelma, how is it with your soul? And y'all have that conversation. And I know what you're thinking, Judy, right?
Yes.
I know what you're thinking, Judy. We don't do visiting at Grandin Court. That's the preacher's job. If anybody does visiting, it's the preacher's job. And I would say one of the things that perhaps this virus is going to give us back is a yearning to visit with one another more. It might be electronically, but it might just be standing across the yard, seeing one another. Knowing that we can't hug each other, knowing we can't sing in the choir together. I have a friend who does drive-in church. David Turner at Central Baptist Church in Richmond does drive-in church. They have drive-in choir practice before they do worship. They stand at their car, stand outside their car. The minister of music plays a recorded piece of music and they sing together. Not the same as standing in the choir loft and singing the Messiah. But I can tell you for those people in that choir, having that fellowship reclaimed is amazing. One of the Sunday school classes in Lumberton sings Victory in Jesus at the end of their Sunday school class every week. It's the most god-awful noise you've ever heard. But they love it. They love it and they sing it and they smile and they know it's terrible, but that's part of their tradition. Tradition, innovation, they keep the tradition, but they do it over Zoom. It's amazing. It's amazing. We do have to think about how we are going to keep 80-year-olds and older connected. That seems to be about the break point for technology. Although my mother-in-law is 92 years old and she is on Facebook and she FaceTimes with our grandkids, with her grandkids and her great-grandkids. So it can be learned. And after I told her there was no button on her computer that would blow up the world, she relaxed with it. But we do have to recover the art of visiting with one another and find creative ways to do that. And I made that statement the other night to a group, and this one gentleman said, "I don't have time to visit." I said, "What else are you going to do? You got nothing but time. The Lord has given us the time back."
For all that many times that we've said, "I don't have time," Bo, we got it back.
Unless you're a millennial. If you're a millennial, you're working 21 hours a day and sleeping 3 hours. The rest of us, we've done all the yard work we can do. We've rearranged every room in our house. We've thrown out old pictures. All our tax documents have been organized. We've done everything we know to do. You got nothing but time.
Bo, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Historically, we have seen crises and tragedy strike typically within our country, nationally or either locally. And following those moments of crisis, we've seen the pews packed with people flocking back to church. And then that gets old after a while and it begins to wane. Put your futurist hat on, if you would, and kind of think into 2021, seeing as this is not just local, but it's worldwide. Tell us what you think is going to happen and where we play a role in the outcome of that.
Well, the church is at its best in a crisis. And nobody celebrates the end of a crisis like church. When the hostages were finally released during the Iran crisis, every church bell in Shepherdsville, Kentucky rang. One peal of the bell for each of those hostages. And then we all gathered in our churches and celebrated. And for 3 or 4 weeks following, we did that. After 9/11, our churches were full and we celebrated. I think that the first couple of Sundays back, this time may not be that, because many of us are still being very careful how we socially interact. But I hope if you got a church bell, you ring it on that day. I hope if you have opportunity to let your community know you're celebrating, that you celebrate with that community. This time next year, I think you may be doing more committee meetings over Zoom than you used to. This time next year, I think you'll probably be live streaming your worship services. You may still, I hope to God we are regathered by this time next year. But in Lumberton, we will continue to live stream. On a good day, in 2 worship services, we have 120 people in Lumberton. I'm still not sure why they have 2 worship services, but we're now having 350 to 450 people come by and worship with us on Sunday morning. Well, all through the week, not just on Sunday morning. So we will continue our live stream, or at least our recorded version of worship. One thing that is beginning to happen is people who live in Omaha, Nebraska want to join our church. We don't have anything in the Constitution and bylaws for people who want to join our church who don't live in our town. How are they going to walk the aisle, for goodness sakes? I think we're going to have to redefine what it means to be a church member. I think we're going to have a hard look at why church membership, why why does anybody want to be a member of a Baptist church? And you all are thinking the answer, so you can vote. That really doesn't motivate me. And I'm an older guy. Melissa doesn't even know what vote means in the church. So we've got to rethink and redefine, again, tradition to innovation. Why church membership? So you can be a part of a faith community. How do we allow that? How does that happen? What does it mean? We don't know that yet. So I suspect a year from now, you're going to have some people who do not live in your community who want to be a member of your church. Maybe we set giving limits. You know, you can be a silver member if you give $100 a month, and be a gold member if you give $500 a month. You know, Kevin, you'll begin to look like a TV evangelist and speak like one. And I don't know, I'm funning about that, but we don't know what church membership is going to look like. I think right now you're considered an active church member. According to Pew Research, people consider themselves active if they come 2 times a month to the church house. I think we're going to see a lot more absenteeism going forward. I don't think that the core members of the church are going to abandon the church. Fellowship is still too important for us. I was with those people in Lumberton about 8 weeks before we went into shelter in place. I miss them. The ones that I know, I miss them. And some that I just know their faces, I don't even know yet, but I still miss them. So we still yearn for community, and we yearn for community in safe places. And I think the church will provide a safe place for gathering. So church membership will be one thing. How we give is another thing. Electronic giving will become more and more prevalent. If you don't have that in place now, your finance committee needs to do some tradition to innovation around how to do online giving. We have done communion over Facebook. Our recorded services, we do communion. And my deacon chair took me to task when I dared to suggest that we would have communion. He said, "How are you going to do that?" I said, "Well, we're going to ask everybody to have a plate and a cup at their table wherever they're doing worship. And as we talk about the elements, then we'll invite people to partake." He said, "That's not communion. A deacon has to serve communion for it to be communion." Well, I asked him to pray about it, and he did, and his therapist tells me he's almost worked through it. You think I'm making that up? I'm not. I did embellish it a bit at the end, but we had a serious conversation about, can it be communion if a deacon doesn't service? And don't even go on the Episcopal Church's website and look at their fight about it. Can it be communion if the priest doesn't serve it? And if the priest doesn't touch it even, which we're all having to figure out what's important in church. Some of the things that we have ritualized, we're going to have to figure out how to make them just as special and just as meaningful without us all being in the room together. And my prayer to God is that this gets settled before Christmas Eve. we don't have the bandwidth for a Christmas Eve service. I don't know about y'all, but we don't. And that's where I go to church right now. That is the highest, holiest day of the year for that church, is Christmas Eve. On Easter, they go to different places. So it's still a grand day, but nothing like Christmas Eve. And if we have to do Christmas Eve virtually, it's going to be a mess. Chris, you talk about anxiety going up and emotional stress and strain. Our high school seniors, we didn't get to do senior graduation, and they missed that tradition. We are doing it next Sunday virtually, much to their chagrin. So lots of things that we have ritualized. How do we do baby dedication over Zoom? For goodness sake. You know, there are lots of rituals that we have taken for granted in the life of the church. You know, funerals have taken on a whole nother level of meaning. I have not done a virtual funeral yet. Most all our funerals so far have been graveside, with those family members saying, we will do a celebration of life when we all get back together. Well, you're going to have to get on the waiting list to do a celebration of life. The first 6 months, I see us going to funerals almost every week, or celebrations almost every week. So, sorry, that's a rant I just went on and didn't mean to, but Gail just told me to be quiet. So,
God bless Gail. Bo, we're up against the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time as well and do a quick plug for next week. Thank you, Bo, for bringing your insight and wisdom. It's good to have you back with Grandin Court folks once again. And a lot of these things we have wrestled with and talked about. But the reason I ask about the futuristic questions, we wish we had a crystal ball and could say, but you know, we've already made a promise to our folks. We missed Easter, and Easter is our big day. And whether that's in September, October, or November, we're going to hold an Easter service and do it upright. So, but we have already thought about what is Advent going to look like in 2020? What is Christmas going to look like in 2020? And especially if there's a second wave or a resurgence or whatever. And so those are the things that we have to, the anxieties that we have to wrestle with nowadays. So thanks for the good word, Bo. I want to put in a word for next week. We're going to continue to do this each Wednesday night. Dr. Bill Leonard, who is the founding dean of Wake Forest Divinity School, professor of Melissa Kessler, and myself at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and another good friend. Dr. Leonard is going to be with us next week, 7:30 on Wednesday night. So I hope that you'll make the time to join us again. If you all will do me a favor, and if you'll do like this at Bo and say thank you to him.
Thank you, Bo.
Thank you, everybody. God bless.
God bless you, Bo. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.